Deja vu all over again. Bad deja vu, that is. Once again, a Rebel News journalist has apparently been cross-checked by a government official when it comes to practicing journalism. Just the other day, our Wonder Down Under, that would be Avi Yemini, meant to get on a plane and fly from Australia to Wellington, New Zealand. Avi wanted to cover the protests that are happening in New Zealand right now regarding the lockdowns. But shockingly, even though Mr. Yemini had a valid passport and all of his paperwork was in order, he was prevented from getting on board that plane. And in the aftermath, the question arises, why? And joining me now from the land of Oz is Avi Yemini himself. Good day, Avi. How you doing there, my friend?
Good morning, mate. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Well, not so great. It pained me to see what was happening with you trying to get over to New Zealand. And Avi, just rewind the tape here. Take us back to the other day when you were hoping to fly into Wellington, only to be told that you were essentially persona non grata for some reason. What happened, my friend?
Look, I think you even need to rewind, a couple of days earlier, where one of the largest news outlets in New Zealand ran a smear campaign against myself and Rukshan, who was also flying with us on a later flight as part of the nzreports.com to cover the protests and to cover generally what's happening in New Zealand. You got to remember, New Zealand's been cut off from the rest of the world for 2 years now. So this was a very important trip. And a couple of days before our flight, the New Zealand Herald, which is one of the largest news outlets in the country, ran a smear campaign encouraging the government to ban us. At the time, I thought, oh, well, we decided to just get legal advice to make sure all of our affairs are in order and that we are fine to travel. And the advice was, absolutely, you are. And so as soon as I arrived at check-in here in Australia, in Melbourne, and it came to the computer, the staff, looked a bit confused as my passport, I was leaving first, my passport was flagged not on the Australian side, on the New Zealand side, which caused them to call the New Zealand immigration to ask them what's going on. New Zealand immigration gave me about a 45-minute, I'm guessing, interview over the phone. I was nice and early. Gave me a 45-minute interview over the phone, which was all like typical questions that you would expect from any sort of immigration interview, until suddenly, after, asking me how much money I have in my account and, making sure I'm not going to move there, even though, to be fair, I was thinking it is a bit odd because as Australians, you actually have the right, I think, to become a New Zealand resident immediately. So, but I just thought they were ticking some boxes, and they certainly were ticking those boxes, but they were ticking those boxes to be able to get to their final point. And their final point was, oh, Mr. Yemini, I've just read an article online about you. I'm assuming it was that article that had just come out from the New Zealand Herald a couple of days ago, encouraging the government to ban me. And they said, I deem you of not good character and therefore exercising my power under the Immigration Act, Section 97 of the Immigration Act of 2009, in banning you, refusing you entry today to New Zealand. She was citing that I have a conviction. Now, which is true. I'm not hiding that I have a conviction. The thing is that to be able to exercise that power, for a conviction to stop you from entering as an Australian to New Zealand, there's a certain threshold, and that threshold was what we received advice on, because that was obviously one of the things that the media was trying to use to encourage the government to ban us, just an excuse to stop us. It was completely politically motivated. And the threshold is that you've got to have been in jail for at least 12 months in the last 10 years for that conviction. Well, mine was a minor conviction. It carried a fine. It was the most basic, entry-level conviction you can get. So there was no real grounds. There was no lawful grounds in using that conviction to stopping me from entering to cover the protests. But
So, Avi, the most startling thing I think you said there was the fact that this bureaucrat that is vetting you seems to be taking her cues from the mainstream media in New Zealand. And I've looked at some of the mainstream media coverage. I would say it's egregious, bordering on defamatory. The New Zealand Herald, they described you as, quote, an infamous Australian far-right misinformation super spreader, end quote. I don't know whether to laugh or cry, but this to me is startling, Avi. Why is a government official taking her cues from what she reads in the media? And does she assume that everything in the media is indeed factual?
Yeah, look, I think it's even worse than that. I think if you take their word for it based on the conversation she had with me, by the way, this immigration official refused to give her name.
Yeah.
Refused to put refused to put in writing the reason, because they know that as soon as they put it in writing, I can go to the courts and appeal. And we've had lawyers on the ground there fighting for my appeal to turn this unlawful decision over since the minute I was refused. But they've only got back to started communicating with us last night, Australia time. But the entire time since then, they've been giving statements to the press. Sorry, that's my dog. Completely false statements to the press. My dog is angry about this. She calls out fake news when she hears it. But seriously, they have a very unhealthy, to say the least, relationship between the government of New Zealand and the press. And that explains everything here, because obviously they don't want me there. I am their biggest threat to both those groups that are in cahoots, because the last thing the mainstream media want there is competition, somebody who's going to take away firstly the eyeballs from their garbage and make people think in New Zealand maybe we're not being told the complete story. Here's somebody telling the other side of the story from the ground. So certainly the media have a reason to really be behind the push, and the government, the Ardern government, certainly have a reason. So I think, yes, they're taking cues from each other. They're helping each other. Wow. They're in this together. And when Sarah, the immigration officer, refused to give her last name, it became really clear somebody was, nudging her. Okay, we need to stop this guy from coming. Just exercise whatever power, even if it's unlawful, because, the proof will be in the pudding. I keep saying this. At the end of the day, I will get to New Zealand. I will prove all those headlines to be false. I will tell the other side of the story there. I will give those people who have, for the last 2 years, been stopped from being allowed to have their say. I'm going to give them that platform that the entire establishment have worked so hard in New Zealand to suppress. We're gonna succeed, and the fact that I'm going to get there proves that this was all politically motivated and just to stop me from going to that protest. And I promise you now, and I promise the audience, that it will backfire. And I'm appreciative to everyone that signed that petition at saveaviyemini.com and everybody that's donated to the legal fund. We're fighting, and we're going to win this fight. This is not a question as to if. I'm an Australian citizen who comes nowhere near the threshold of being allowed to be banned from New Zealand. The only time you have to apply for a visa from Australia, or one of the reason in my situation would be if you're actually a criminal with a criminal history that you've served more than 12 months in jail. Nowhere near the threshold.
Yeah. So
sorry,
there's,
haters.
As you said, Avi, that benchmark hasn't been met. And it sounds to me like the relationship between the government and the mainstream media in New Zealand, it's a mere reflection of what we have in Canada. It's basically the same. In fact, I don't know what the funding mechanism is in New Zealand, but as you know, in Canada, the CBC and the rest of the mainstream media are funded to the tune of billions of dollars per year. It's a blatant conflict of interest. But on the topic of the government,
I do believe it's similar, at least per capita. So it might not be the same numbers, but it's certainly highly funded by the Ardern government.
Well, then you don't bite the hand that feeds. That's for sure. But speaking of the government in New Zealand, Avi, the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, she was questioned about this at a scrum. Let's throw to that video and see what the Prime Minister had to say.
There's also been a YouTuber from Australia that says that they've been denied entry into New Zealand. Have you been briefed on the situation?
I've only what I have seen in the public domain. And just to be absolutely clear, this is not something that, as I understand, would come to up to a ministerial level decision. I understand that it is solely for immigration, and it's not something I had any awareness of until I saw some commentary online.
Prime Minister,
yeah.
If I may, how concerned is the government at the potential for people coming from overseas to be part of these protests?
How what, sorry?
How concerned is the government that people might come from overseas to join these protests?
Again, for us, it's not about where people have come from. It's simply whether they're willing to engage in peaceful and lawful protest.
Okay, so Avi, the Prime Minister is claiming that she only knows about your situation based on what's in the public domain. Are you buying that?
Look, maybe, but I ain't taking her word for it. That's for sure. Maybe she doesn't know. But look, she has an army of, people that do her dirty work. So she doesn't necessarily, I think there's certainly consensus amongst the Ardern government and bureaucrats that Avi Yemini is a threat. So I don't think it would have had to go to her level to ask her whether we should ban him. But what she is saying that is interesting, that it's not a ministerial decision. It hasn't gone to that level. And why that is important for people to understand is because there's two ways to refuse an Aussie entry. One is the conviction has to be over 12 months in prison. The other is if the minister uses a broad power, which you could still appeal, but it's much broader than just the threshold of the conviction. So if the minister can say, I believe that Avi Yemini might commit a jailable offence here, then we're talking about a case where, well, then we can argue whether on what basis. But it is a much broader term and there's a much broader scope from. And she's saying in there, well, no, we don't. It hasn't gone to that level. It's just immigration, distancing herself from the decision, because obviously it is not a good look if the government had a hand in it.
So, Avi, let's then, for the sake of argument, take the Prime Minister at her word. She had nothing to do with this. It's not at the ministerial level. The only other conclusion I can draw from that is that this individual immigration officer, whose name we only have as Sarah, we don't have her surname, I got a hunch that she recognizes your name. Maybe she's not politically aligned to your viewpoints, and she's carrying out a vendetta, because what else can it be, my friend?
Like I said in the beginning, David, I think that it's potentially even something like, I think it's much more sinister. I think it's much more deep. I think it's a connection. And there we go. The big conspiracy theorist that I am. I'm proving the New Zealand Herald right. But, when and if this actually ends up going before a judge, if they don't change the decision, appeal the decision on their own, if it has to go in front of a judge, it'll be interesting, one, to see all the communications in discovery. Two, it'll be great for people to hear that recording of, especially the last few minutes of the recording, of the immigration officer who said on the call, I just read an article about you. Since when are articles in the paper grounds And since when is that evidence that you rely on
crazy.
to make any decision? They didn't. By the way, they didn't ask me anything about my criminal history. They didn't give me an opportunity to put my in my defence, to put my defence forward, as in going. I did say specifically. I said to her, I understand that the threshold is 12 months.
And Avi, here's the perversely ironic factor of this story, I think. Yes, they prevented you from leaving Australia and touching down in Wellington, but they didn't prevent Rukshan Fernando. He was flagged. He went through all the hoops. They eventually let him there. So he is reporting for Rebel News. He is showing what's going on. And why don't we throw to a brief clip of the demonstration that he covered the other day. Check it out.
So guys, I'm filming here the counter protest here by Antifa. So the two protesters are going. The main protest is walking past, but there is a counter protest separated here by the police.
Not the Modis up there! Oh, embarrassing!
In the anti-government protest, there's a lot more diversity, a lot more older people, families, people of different backgrounds. There's a lot more of that. Whereas on this side, a lot of young, and for lack of a better word, white people mostly. Looks like young uni students.
So there you go. First of all, Avi, I'm so sorry to see that the virus that is known as Antifa has even infected New Zealand. But what did you make of that protest and that bizarre counter protest when the Antifa types were denouncing the anti-lockdown people as racist, and as Mr. Fernando pointed out, there was more diversity on the anti-lockdown side than the Antifa side. What do you make of that, Avi?
Isn't that typical? Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to seeing Rukshan's full reports on the day, which I imagine are coming to New Zealand, nzreports.com in coming days. But absolutely, it's laughable. It's laughable. You know what? I watched it with FOMO because I'm thinking, God, you know me, David, I would love to get up in there and have a chat with these anti-fascists that are standing there protesting, Indigenous New Zealanders, telling them they're racist because they don't like mandates and they don't like Jacinda Ardern's socialist policies that is destroying the country. They don't like where the cost of living is going. They don't like the fact that they lost their jobs because Jacinda Ardern is a tyrant. Yes, I would have loved to be there, and I think it's great. And, I think on the point that Rukshan got there, it's important for people to understand, while Rukshan doesn't have that technicality of a conviction that they can kind of try twist to use, at least in the short term, but they tried really hard. He was flagged, and the Qantas staff fought hard for him, he says. And I do truly believe that if not for, firstly, the thousands that have already signed the petition to let me in, and then also the fact that they know that there's legal action looming, again, through the saveaviyemini.com page, so the petition there, and the fact that we're appealing it through the courts if we have to, and the fact that Jacinda Ardern herself distanced herself so quickly from the decision. I think those three compounding points basically made the officer on the other end of Rukshan's decision think twice and go, okay, we don't have a conviction that we can puff up and basically use and act like we think, on the face of it is a character thing that we can kick him out. So they had to let him in, and they let him in, and he still reported on the event. And I promise you now, to the entire audience, my promise to you is I'm grateful. New Zealand's very close. So when I win that appeal, when I can take my passport and get in there, I will be in there. I will tell the other side of the story. nzreports.com will get more views and there will be more interest in it because of this media smear campaign and this, not just a smear campaign, the media campaign to have me banned.
Yeah.
It will only draw more eyeballs to it, and this will backfire spectacularly. I'm not going to deny it. It hurt the last couple of days. It hurt to get banned off a flight. It hurt that the immigration department is so good at their PR that they managed to manipulate a media not to even ask the question of, okay, you say he's banned for a conviction, instead of asking, well, how could he be banned for that conviction that wasn't 10? He wasn't jailed for. He was only fined for. How can you ban him for that when the act is pretty clear? Instead of them doing that, they ran with a hurtful headline: Avi Yemini banned for an embarrassing conviction. But that's what it is. It's an embarrassing conviction because in time will tell all truth. But it's embarrassing having a conviction like that. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's certainly a minor conviction. I was fined for it because it was a little considered from the legal perspective a minor assault.
No, and to speak to your first point, Avi, I think you're right. I think the government of New Zealand, and certainly the media in New Zealand, are going to experience their own Barbara Streisand effect. That of unintended consequences. And we have to fight this, Avi, because this is becoming too de rigueur for my liking. This idea that government officials and bureaucrats, they're picking and choosing which journalists are allowed into the press conference and which are not, which get funded, which are not. It is a dark direction we're going down in terms of a free press, and that is why we have to take this stand. I'm so happy to see we already have about 14,000 signatures on the petition, Avi. Our goal is, I believe, 20,000. I'm sure we're going to reach it and more. Avi, I want to thank you so much for your time, and good luck. We're going to get you into Wellington come hell or high water. It is important. So thank you again, my friend, and you have a good weekend.
Thanks, David.
What you just saw was an excerpt from my nightly show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every weekday I do a monologue. Usually it's about half an hour. Then I interview an interesting guest, and then we read my hate mail or my fan mail, whichever is more fun. It's only available behind a paywall, though. That's how we pay our bills here at Rebel News. We don't take a dime from Justin Trudeau. But the good news is it's only $8 a month, about half the price of Netflix. And in addition to my nightly show, you also get weekly shows from 4 other friends here at Rebel News. So you're getting 36 shows a month just for $8. I think it's worth it. And even if you're not quite sure, do it anyways, because we rely on viewers like you to keep us free and independent. I promise you I'll never take a dime from Trudeau. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com and click subscribe. Thanks.